Welcome to SkewbSchool. Last week I showed you the basics of one looking and now I'm going to give some more tips. So there will be 4 in total and there will be timestamps in the description. So the first one is that when you are learning cases or there are tracing pieces, and there are 2 ones in the bottom, I would always recommend using those. So for tracing, for example, if you know this 2 move case, after a while you will start to remember how these corners move, and when you do a move like this, for example, these 2 pieces don't move, while if you would trace pieces at the top they would move a lot more. So when you are 2 in the bottom when tracing, I would recommend choosing those. And for learning cases, I also like it because this configuration will be in other cases as well, so you already know how you have to one look these cases, and I found it easier to be able to just have to look at these 2 pieces to know how the corners are at the top. So because you can just quickly look at this and immediately know which case you are going to get. And here it's the same. When you know this case, the corners will stay the same when you are doing this case or this case. So I would recommend always to choose 2 in the bottom. The second tip I have is when you use an ALK for a case where you don't start with white on bottom. For example, this one. Here you would have to rotate to here, twist the corner, sledge. So what you can also do when you one look, for example, this move, instead of doing the one move layer and rotate, you can rotate from the start. So then you insert this corner into here and then you're already in position to do that. So for a one move layer it's pretty easy, but when you go to like two moves, then it becomes harder because you can start putting the corner in like this or this. So there are multiple options, and what you have to do then is to look at the layer you just one looked and try to solve it from this side. So when we look at this corner, has to go here, so I have to insert it like this and then insert it like that, and then we can execute the ALK. And when you have 3 pieces it starts to become harder. For example, if we one look this case, you would see we get it like this, but doing this and then rotating is pretty slow. So then we look here and then we have to insert this one in 3 moves, but then we are going to look how we are going to solve this layer from here. So we have to do this move, then this move, and then this move. So we actually insert it like this, twist the corner, and do a sledge. So then it becomes pretty quickly, instead of just having to rotate, which is kind of awkward. And the last tip I have is when you have solved corners and there are solved pieces. So when you have a 2 move layer from here, you see you have a 2 move layer, and you see that you want to look to a U-perm, for example, on red, for example, because here it's solved. So it can also be solved in 2 moves. So here we can see we also have this case, or here this case. So you can look for better ALKs. And also, for example, for a U-perm, most of the time it's easiest to execute it when you have a vertical U-perm. So when you're one looking on red, for example, and you insert this piece and you see you have a U-perm, but from here it can be quite awkward to execute it. So then you are going to look for the case that would be on bottom. So if you would one look it, it would be the white one here. So we're going to look for a 2 mover on white, and we find it here. So for low move counts it's pretty easy, but when you have 3 movers it can become a bit harder, and 4 mover also. But if you practice it, it will become much easier because there aren't a lot of possibility for 3 or 4 movers, so you will pretty easy to see which layer you have to execute. But this also works for like O-perms. Here you can also have a good side, or when you have a triple sledge case. And here it's mostly about how good the continuation is. So here if you would have one looked blue this could have been quite tricky, while here the two move layer is much easier. So then you have a choice which one you are going to choose. And the last tip, and probably the most important tip, even if you don't think you are going to be able to one look, try to one look as much as possible in that situation. For example, try to one look the corners or the corners and where the U center is. That can help you a lot. For example, for here, it's also possible that the case ends up being really easy to one look. So for example, if you know how this case works, if you start one looking it, you start to notice that everything is solved and you get a pure pie. So for example, you wouldn't think in that situation you were going to be able to trace two moves to a case, you know, but because the case was pretty easy to recognize, you were able to one look. So just try to one look as much information as possible, but that it can help you during your solves.